This morning's reading is from Mark chapter 14. While Jesus was still speaking, Judas, one of the 12, came up accompanied by a crowd carrying swords and clubs. They had been sent by the chief priests, the religious scholars, and the elders. The betrayer had arranged this signal for them: "Whomever I embrace is the one. Arrest him and take him away under guard." Judas went directly to Jesus, embraced him, and said, "Rabbi." At this, they laid hands on Jesus and arrested him. One of the bystanders drew a sword and struck the high priest's attendants, cutting off an ear. Jesus then said, "Why have you come to arrest me with swords and clubs, as though I were a robber? I was within your reach daily, teaching in the temple precincts, yet you never arrested me. But let the scriptures be fulfilled." With that, all the disciples deserted Jesus and fled. Following Jesus was a youth wearing nothing but a linen cloth, whom they also tried to arrest, but who fled naked, leaving the cloth behind. Ancient words for our present day consideration.
Well, it had been a while since I've preached on the Passion story. We usually tend to be more cosmic at Easter time, but it's been interesting to look at the original prints that Reverend Kent Miller lent to us this season, to look at the Easter story in a personal way, hopefully. For a religion that's supposed to be about love, it seems to me that there are a lot of Christians who can really be hateful. A lot of Christians can really be hateful. If you got your impression of Christianity from television, from televangelists, from the political bullies, I would understand why people would give up on the message. Maybe the first person that was hated in Christianity was Judas. And the interesting thing about hate is you can replace one scapegoat with another pretty easily. I've never met anybody who is just prejudiced against one group of people. They may exist, but usually if somebody has prejudice against one group, it gets more generalized. The early church hated Judas so much that he died twice in Scripture. But that's not easy to do. In the first story, he felt guilty about betraying Jesus and hung himself. But that really wasn't satisfying enough. So in another story, he buys a field with the blood money, goes out to plow, and falls and his intestines burst up, which seemed to give a lot more gratification to some people. Judas is a figure who, why don't we go to the story? This is the story of Judas's kiss of Jesus. And I'll try either not to get in the way or alternate whose way I'm standing in. But you see there, if you like love scenes, this is very creepy, grabbing Jesus. Jesus isn't pushing him away. He's a very loving person, but it's clearly he's being intruded upon. You see the swords there as the troops move in. You see the followers of Jesus terrified and pulling back. Probably the first group that Jesus became representative of in terms of Christian hate groups was they began to see Judas as an example of Judaism. And to this day, there's anti-Semitism that haunts the Easter story, and really the Christmas story, and a whole lot of the stories. When at Christmas time we say Jesus was born King of the Jews, how do you think that makes a Jewish person feel? When in the Easter story, The Jews are the villains. Jewish people didn't have the power to execute somebody. Right? Rome was the source of the violence. But when you have one scapegoat, it's very easy to slip somebody else in. Probably the best at that I've ever seen on planet Earth is Pat Robertson. He can find a villain anywhere for any story. What he should have done was be a Christian weatherman and say why tornadoes happen, like whose fault it was, if there's a tornado or an earthquake. You know, what group has offended God so that there was this act of weather? But this is very interesting theology here. Pat Robertson says, homosexuals are like Judas. They look good in a robe and their kisses are legendary. Yeah. Yeah, some of these people you just wonder, like, how does it get that pathological? If we take Scripture literally, that's very likely to happen. Because what happens when you think you're taking the Bible literally, because you can't, that language is subjective. When you think you're taking it literally, you are literally worshiping yourself or your group, whoever's defining the terms. If you look at a story like this, there's contradictions. There's like 4 different versions of the story, and they contradict each other all over the place. In one of the stories, Judas comes up and Jesus says, "Why are you here, friend?" Doesn't know that it was going to happen. The other story, in the dinner beforehand, he predicts that somebody's going to betray him. Is it I? Is it I? In one story, Jesus takes the money because he's greedy. In another, a woman breaks a jar of very expensive perfume, a year's salary, breaks it to anoint Jesus' feet, and it breaks Judas' heart. That money could have been given to the poor. There's even an early Christian gospel of Judas, that says that he and Jesus talked. He didn't want to do it, but Jesus talked him into doing it so that the ministry could be fulfilled. Now, if the point were to take the Bible literally, we would be in a world of hurt. And if you've not been dishonest enough to synthesize all those stories, that's to your credit. It's mythology. It's mythology. Like we look at in school, I was taught everybody else has mythologies but us. Look at the stories. They're the same kind of thing. If the point were for us to believe in history something happened, we would be in a world of hurt. The stories don't jive. If the point is to become awakened and aware and loving, those differences complement each other. They give us different aspects of what we need to learn. What I believe is that each of the disciples represented a kind of human temperament, which was helpful in some ways and harmful in other ways. Jesus represents radical universal love. None of us can do it perfectly. So in the story, each of the disciples is trying to love, but is unable to. And the point is not to criticize them, but to realize it's okay that you're a human being. It's okay that you're not Jesus number 2. Christ doesn't represent Jesus with superpowers. Christ is a sense of the interconnectedness of things. So what we're going to do is look at this story, and the question is, what does it illumine in your life? what you would recognize if you were from the ancient world is there's mystical symbols in the story. When you see the story of the Last Supper, if you lived in the ancient world, you would recognize it right away. The betrayal of Osiris. Right? You're having a last meal. Osiris is betrayed. He's cut into pieces. That is celebrated by breaking bread and drinking beer, which I think beats grape juice, but to each their own. Ancient symbols that were being played with and used, like a hip-hop artist, playing off themes, not so that you would believe something happened in the past, but so that you would recognize that it's happening right now in your life, through you, through your imperfections, sometimes through your failures. First thing I think the story is teaching us is that we all betray and are betrayed. In the early church, there was a circle dance that I talked about sometime. Sometime we'll do that here, maybe when we get to Labyrinth. But what would happen is somebody from the community would represent Jesus, and they would read the story just in couplets. I am born, I give birth. I pierce, I am pierced. I am betrayed, I betray. And the point is to realize that we are part of universal humankind, and we've all been betrayed, and we've all betrayed. If that's not okay, we can't really start on the journey. Right? But when somebody betrays me, I feel that so intensely, I forget that I've done the same thing. Right? I feel my wounds. I don't feel your wounds to the same degree at the beginning. So I weave this narrative. And the story is trying to help us to step out of that self-centeredness. Every one of us, our lives are so immediate, so close. We're so afraid and we take things so personally that it's hard to step out of that narrative and see the universal human family, much less the web of life. So in the mystery religions, the Savior teacher would walk ahead of the group. And I believe the early church recognized the stories of Jesus were doing that. They were initiating people. In this case, the story of Osiris is repeated. I believe the Judas kiss represents when we try to love, but we're not capable of true love yet. And that doesn't make us evil. We all start off as little seeds. And we have to realize that the failure can't be the last word. That the stories are trying to tell us failure is not the last word. Even if you've betrayed your best friend or been betrayed by your best friend, don't let that be the end of the story. Let that be the painful beginning of the story. One of the wettest Judas kisses I've ever seen in my life was when Jamie Spar, who's a friend of the church, she was a pastor who realized that she was lesbian, and got in trouble with the denomination. She always invites heterosexual allies to go along. So I got to do some wonderful, wonderful things with that group of rascals, as she would call them. But we were in California, Redwood Presbytery, and they've, in their speeches, said, Janie Spar is doing what Christ would have done. She's ordaining LGBTQ people and calling them humans and honoring their humanity. That's what Christ would have us do, but the Presbyterian Book of Order, Book of Rules, forbids it, so we have to rebuke you. Now, I'm sitting there in the front, but I've made wonderful friends over the years from this community. They're sitting behind me. And one of the women from the Judicial Council steps forward and says, "But Jamie, we want you to know that we love you." And I felt a groan behind me of people who had been dehumanized their whole life. See, I've never had that experience. But I could feel the dehumanization that was taking. I could feel the dagger that was wrapped in velvet. The Judas kiss is when we try to love someone else, but we're stuck in some system that oppresses, that limits us, that binds us. I would like to say that this is an anti-capitalist story. Judas was the treasurer. But in one of the versions of the story, and you can play it that way if you want, but in another version of the story, Judas is indignant because money is not being spent on the poor. See, the thing is, without love, any system can go bad. Because what Judas in that story didn't realize is this woman is so grateful that Jesus has touched her life. The perfume is worth a year's salary. She breaks it in gratitude. And by the time Jesus recognizes what's going on, it's already broken. Right? You're not going to put it in there. It's a type of perfume that like grows in the Himalayas. If the jar's broken, what is the point of making her feel bad? You can understand where he's coming from, but you can understand where Jesus is saying, leave her alone. All you people, leave her alone. She's trying to do something beautiful. She's seeing something that you don't see, that I'm not going to make it out of here alive. So, and then the last phrase in that story is the perfume filled the house. These are myths that help us understand our own lives and put things in context. First thing that I think the story is telling us is that we all betray and are betrayed. And the second thing is that means that forgiveness has to be the golden key. When we just try to love, it short circuits from time to time. We carry old wounds, we cause old wounds, and if we cannot let that go, love doesn't continue to blossom. Jesus is a symbol of radical universal love. Forget Christianity for a second and just sit in the room with this young rabbi trying to share an experience with people who aren't getting it yet. Every disciple misunderstands in a different way. And what Jesus knows is that's the only beginning place. If you can't start with your failures, you might as well not even start the journey. So in this case, it starts with being betrayed or betraying and not letting that have the last word. I really like John Paul. Pope John Paul wrote this story. He said, "What a mistake those who do not hope make. Judas made a huge blunder the day in which he sold Christ for 30 pieces of silver. But he made an even bigger mistake when he thought that his sin was too great to be forgiven. No sin is too big. Any wretchedness, however great, can always be enclosed in infinite mercy." So, if you personify the sacred and you believe in God, what this is saying is, if you think about it deeply, the idea that your power to sin is greater than God's ability to forgive. Your ability to wound is greater than God's ability to heal. It doesn't make any sense. And so the stories help us step out of the tunnel vision where life doesn't make any sense. It's a dead end. There's no point in going on. And again, it's initiating us into the mysteries. In this case, when you see swords, the story of the swords, the torches, the clubs, you see cups on the communion table. Those are symbols from the mystery religions. You're being initiated in the caves, which is why you still see them on playing cards. Like tarot cards, it's still cups and clubs and this kind of thing. Modern cards, the clubs look like clovers now. The swords look like whatever the little fleur-de-lis is. Hearts, I think, are cups now, and cups are now. But we don't have to go back and learn all of those things. I only did that to get a sense that these stories are about now, here and now. They're about you and me. And even if you can't figure out what it meant to somebody else, sharing the story can open what it means for us. And even if we don't have psychic powers to forgive, we can realize the importance of letting go of the pain. What we can't do right away, over time, we can do, step at a time, letting go of yesterday's pain that we might experience today's love. So the first thing is we all betray, we've been betrayed. Second is that means that forgiveness has to be the golden key. And then finally, again from the mystery religions, life for all of its pain initiates us into this greater love. If we stop judging ourselves and each other, and begin to believe in grace, offer grace to ourselves and to others. We never let hatred have the last word or pain have the last word. If somebody has hurt you, you can't just get rid of the pain of that. That's not hatred. Not wanting to be in the same room with somebody who hurt you, that's smart. That's not hate. Staying awake in the middle of the night, seeing somebody's face and wishing you could punch it, yeah, that's a little closer to that. In John, this universal love, this radical universal love, is represented as the Christ and as the I am. And I try from time to time to preach on these stories where Jesus says, I am this, I am that, I'm the way, because I am is the divine name. In one story when Jesus says, who are you looking for? We're looking for the troublemaker. Then he responds, I am he. In Greek, that's the divine name. What it's saying is no matter how miserable life gets, there is a love that's waiting to be born through each of us. And none of us has ever done anything that could disqualify us possibly from this love, because the love is coming from a deeper place than what happens to us. If you believe in God, then it's trusting that this power of love is greater than our ability to make mistakes. If you don't believe in God, it still works. God's a symbol too. Can you say yes to radical universal love? Can you put your treachery in that context? Let it be softened, mellowed, marinated by grace. You don't have to manufacture radical universal love. You just have to stop blocking it from growing in your life. Judas is one of the great villains in Christianity. Nothing would have happened if he had not done what he did. And the sad thing is, if he'd let himself be forgiven, he did not kill himself. It would probably be the greatest gospel there is, because every disciple failed. But if Judas could have received love, he could have forgiven himself. What a great example that would be for the rest of us. Because we don't betray each other because we're evil. We betray each other because we're hurt. We're wounded. And we can't fight that. We can't dissect it, cut it off. It has to be healed. And the golden key is not trying to manufacture love. It's to let go of the pain. To stop carrying yesterday's pain. And let radical, universal love be born in our lives today. Well, this is my understanding of the text. I never want you to take my wisdom over yours. So let's take a moment for you to think how you understand these words.